I think thinking about, are there organizations that we see out there that are trying these things that I could, understand a case study or they can walk me through, like being intentional when you go to a conference or you connect with another nonprofit that are doing the things well that maybe are weaker for your organization or give you pause or give you worry. Like, don't be afraid to reach out and say to an organization like Movember, how did you go through that cultural shift of like being able to take more risks? Because I'm sure they weren't always like that.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with Michelle Boggs. Michelle, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thanks so much for having me, Mallory. I always see you in person at conferences, and it's so nice to be joined virtually with you today, which is like the opposite of what most people say. They're happy in person, but I feel like I see you in person more than I see you online. So thanks for having me.
Which is so fun. It's been so great to build a relationship that way. Why don't you tell everyone, before we dive in, why don't you just tell everyone a little bit about you and your work and what brings you to our conversation today?
Sure. So I joined Classy about a year and a half ago as their executive nonprofit industry advisor. And so I jumped from being a frontline fundraiser myself for the last 20 years to now working at a technology company. So I get asked a lot, why did you make that move? How is it going? And, having been a fundraiser my whole career, towards the end of it, I started to feel like as a sector, we really had to start doing things differently and seeing some of the challenges we continue to be up against, right? Like declining gifts and donor count and giving amounts and declining trust in nonprofits and all those things. I really have felt like technology is the answer to a lot of these challenges. And so the opportunity to work at a technology company and sort of sit at that intersection of social good and technology has been really, really interesting. And it's been amazing to see my inklings about this kind of come to fruition and see a lot of our customers who leverage technology in the right ways, see the fruits of that and raise more and reach more people. And so it's been a really, really interesting and fun journey. And I think it says a lot about an organization like Classy, making sure that they have someone in-house who has that genuine, authentic understanding and perspective of the sector, so that I'm always the voice of the customer. We may think about a product and think it's super cool, and I'm able to kind of bring that level of, well, I don't know, when I was at a nonprofit, I'm not sure I would have used that, or I'm not sure that would have been as helpful as you think it would have been. So it's been great to be the voice of the customer and make sure that everything that we create and put out to market genuinely will help these organizations raise as much money as possible. And then just quickly, I'll add, when I was considering coming to Classy, something that really interested me was the connection to GoFundMe. So if your listeners aren't aware, GoFundMe and Classy joined forces coming up on almost 2 years ago now. And it was this idea of, introducing the millions of users on the GoFundMe platform, people giving to people, crowdfunding, introducing that group of generous individuals with the nearly 7,000 nonprofits that Classy serves, and looking for these connection opportunities. Because I'm sure, as you've seen in your work, people don't just give to charities anymore. There's lots of other ways to give, and that's evolving, and how people show up and how they're generous. And so it's been really neat to see what we can do as combined companies. And it's been neat, Mallory, honestly, to look at the data that we sit on. I mean, we sit on really the most unique data set, the most unique philanthropic data set that exists, of people giving to people and people giving to organizations. So it's exciting to see what we can do once we really start to dig into that data. So yeah, that's what I've sort of been up to.
Oh my gosh, nothing, right? Just chilling.
In addition to my traveling the country every week to attend conferences and speak and all of that, hence why we've gotten to know each other and build a relationship. Road warriors.
Totally. Well, okay. There's so much in there that I want to sort of double click on, but I'm curious, you do sit in a really interesting position sort of as the voice of nonprofits to a tech company, and sort of making sure that, both, it sounds like how the tools are built, but then likely how those tools are, disseminated or distributed or communicated to nonprofits. And I'm curious, from your vantage point, just think about sort of the tech the tech ecosystem at large, not just in terms of Classy, but like, where do you think there's often the biggest disconnect between what nonprofits are thinking about when it comes to technology versus how technology companies are thinking about things? Like, where do you have to sort of do the most translating there?
Oh gosh, so much. I think I think what we don't pay enough attention to or give enough credit to, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but like there's still, and I'd be curious if you experience this with the organizations that you support, but I think there is still such a disconnect between what happens in the technology space at a nonprofit and what happens like in development. There's still these silos. And I was very guilty of this. Before coming to Classy, I was president of a children's hospital in Miami. And, I'll be vulnerable and honest. Like oftentimes whatever was happening with digital marketing, online giving, all of that stuff, I sort of like stayed out of that and trusted my team to sort of pick the tools and do what they needed to do. And I was so focused on top major gift donors, high net worth donors, legacy gifts, my board, that took so much of my time. And I think where I really missed the boat was that it's all connected. Like the digital first strategy, it's really the wave of the future. I mean, if you look at organizations that are really focused on a digital first approach, just like the best consumer brands that exist, like the Starbucks, like the Amazons, obviously, their growth has been, I think the last statistics I saw was like 15 to 20% faster than an average nonprofit who's not paying attention to digital. So I think that I just felt as though it was something I didn't need to think about. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I think it still happens in a lot of ways where you don't have that digital technology person who has a seat at the table, and digital isn't always a part of the overall fundraising strategy. It's still sort of approached siloed. And that's why we could be running faster and getting things done quicker if we're all going at it together. And so we really try to push our organizations to multi-thread and get everyone involved in choosing a tech stack and adopting that tech stack and understanding how it's going to make them more efficient at their jobs, how it's going to help them acquire more donors, how it's helped them going to reach communities maybe they've never even dreamed of being able to reach because of the scale and accessibility that technology provides. So I think like one mistake is just assuming that technology is a part of the culture or digital is a part of the culture. And I still find it to be very separate. It's the same as like, I think the older version of that is like marketing. Like marketing wasn't always or isn't always intertwined with development. Like they're having completely separate strategies and meetings and goals. And so I think that's been sort of something I'm always bringing to the surface and double clicking on is like really at what level do the folks within this organization understand technology and what it can do for their organization. And I think we sometimes think folks are further along in that journey than maybe they are. And then you throw in like the AI and all of that. And then you wonder why you get questions like, what AI should I buy?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Okay, as you're saying that, it's like a light bulb's going off in my head that like there has been this massive sort of change in how we think about digital technology in the fundraising space from being like a payment processor form that you have to put there in order to collect a donation online versus having a tool that allows you to lead with a digital first strategy that actually helps, isn't just there to kind of capture the transactional information, but is really there to cultivate, engage, and incentivize and inspire people to give in the first place. And so I feel like you're sort of talking about this. When you were talking about that, I was thinking like, yeah, like I don't know when my brain or if my brain ever really moved from I'm swapping out payment processors to I'm really selecting a partner in my fundraising. And this relates to all of the different ways that we're fundraising, not just, a campaign online that then is disconnected from our pipeline of deeper cultivation or anything like that.
Yes, I think you said that so eloquently. And I think to unpack that a bit more, it's like we still have organizations we talk to on a regular basis that, going back to just that payment processor, like we can't even undervalue how many organizations and even like well-known brands raising a lot of money year over year, their online giving experience is stuck in the dark ages. I mean, where I'm still surprised where you go online and it's not mobile optimized. There's tons of friction. There's so many steps. And then at the very end, as a supporter, as a donor, I can only give via credit card. Like that's never going to fly, especially generationally, because I am going to expect my experience with a nonprofit to be in line with my other digital commerce experiences. So back to my, I feel like I'm always talking about Starbucks, but like, when I go on the Starbucks app, and like the app knows me, it feels so personal. Like it tells me what I ordered before and how much I loved that drink. And it gives me special rewards and incentives. And it's so personal that, first and foremost, you've got to make sure your giving experience is modern and, on par with what we expect when we do any sort of transaction online. And then to your point, how do we weave in that personalized, now it's like a true relationship this donor has given? How do we start to think about empowering them to start a journey with us that's meaningful to them? And it might look completely different depending on who they are. They may want to share that they've given with their friends. They might want to start a fundraiser on my behalf. They may want to attend one of my events. And like that experience needs to be seamless throughout. And that technology has to feel personalized and intuitive and all those things. So there's just so many complexities to it, but that's what kind of gets me going every day, is like helping organizations start to see that in a more clear way of how important it is.
So I'm curious what you think about this, because you were fundraising, well before we had the digital tools that we have today. So was I. And I asked a question recently in my community about why people didn't use like a hashtag or whatever personalization thing at the beginning of mass emails, like why they didn't do something where their CRM system would insert the first name of the person automatically. And so I was asking, do you not do this, create personalization around those emails because you don't have the tech capability to do it? Or do you not do it because you're afraid of something going wrong? And there were like 20% of people said because they were afraid of something going wrong. And,
Wow.
What was really interesting to me about it, so I like sat there and thought about it. And as somebody who on a very good email software has actually had the first name thing like misfire at one point and everybody get the wrong thing, like I get that fear, even though of course, like that's much less likely than human error. But when I was thinking about that decision, not only is it less likely in human error, but the likelihood of it going right and the impact that will have on the people receiving it is obviously so much like greater, like the positive impact is so much greater than the potential negative impact. But even that aside, what it made me think of was like, and maybe you had a similar experience. Like I remember when a mail merge went wrong at my organization. And I sat on the floor of that nonprofit's office till 2 a.m. reprinting labels because somehow we had accidentally, like something was off and all of the addresses and all of the names became mismatched. And I can like, as I'm telling you this story, I can feel in my body like how horrible of an experience this was. And we're going to miss a deadline and there was a campaign coming up and it was so stressful. And Tim Lockey talks about like tech trauma a lot. And I'm curious, and I feel like I have it, And so I'm curious, like from your experience, having been that frontline fundraiser for a long time, likely having gone through tech trauma or mail merge trauma, or whatever you call that. How do we help nonprofit leaders who have those experiences be able to take like first steps forward to be using tools more effectively in ways that really are going to support them, but they just feel so scary to try?
Gosh, that's such a great question. And so I'm just curious really quick. So the 20% that were afraid that it was going to go wrong, was there also another fear that came to light, or was it mostly just that the name was going to be wrong? Was there anything else? I just want to make sure before I dig into this question.
They didn't give details. It was just that like something would
Yep.
go wrong, and it wouldn't work perfectly.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think like you're hitting on a theme that to me is rampant so much more even than just like in the tech piece, right? Of like we might send an email and it might, not have the right name or whatever it is. I think there's this like sense of control that exists in the sector for a lot of really good reasons. Like so much of the great work that you and Nathan are doing around fundraising AI is like trust is our greatest currency. So we have this data. We have to be very careful if donors lose trust in us or we do something wrong with the data. This idea of like technology for scale. What if it all goes wrong and we send, a bunch of emails with the wrong name? It comes up a lot, Mallory, in marketing. Like if a person wants to fundraise on my behalf or support my organization, they have to do it within the parameters of how I advise them to. And all of those things are just holding us back as a sector. And it's so easy to say, like, just go with it, get uncomfortable, let go of control, let go of your protectiveness of your message. You've got to empower others. But I really think like we have to start thinking that way of like people almost like there's like data that says like people almost prefer the humanness of interacting with a brand rather than like it being so buttoned up and perfect. So like think about all those funny stories you hear about where like someone, makes a comment on social media about like a bad pizza delivery from Domino's, and then Domino's jumps into the comments and is like, "Oh my gosh," and they say something funny, and it like all it does is help their brand. And so I think we have to almost approach it that way of like letting go of some of that control and letting your teams be creative and come up with ideas and campaigns and strategies that maybe you've never done before, use technology in ways you've never thought of before. And I really think that the positives are totally going to outweigh some of the risks, as your, merge example is a great one. Another thing I want to bring up that's happened with technology is like it has allowed us to scale, but I think sometimes it has brought us back a little to that transactional relationship. And I think maybe that's where some of the hesitation is as well. So I think we have to start thinking about personalization piece and bringing people in once they make that transaction to now, like I said earlier, become this empowered supporter or this believer of your organization. And do you equip them with different tools to support you and do it in a way that's meaningful to them, not so much within your strict parameters or rules. So I think it's the more that we can just meet people where they are. A really funny story that I always stick with, and this is a very outlandish story, but I think it brings the point home, is at the peer-to-peer forum in Philadelphia last month, the organization Movember, amazing. Like they come out and say, we're very risky in our messaging. We do things differently. We're very raw in our content. Like they're definitely innovative in the way that they approach marketing, how they use technology. They're very okay with making mistakes. So they would be fine with your example of let's personalize the name and hope it all works out. And if it doesn't, we'll make some kind of funny joke about it and everybody will laugh. But anyway, they gave the example of this young, I guess, college kid wanted to raise money on behalf of Movember and bring awareness to testicular cancer, which is already like, a touchy subject. And he had his mother or grandmother literally make a costume, testicles, that he wore around campus and did this like whole run. And Movember was like, I think a lot of organizations would be like, no, thank you. But we were like, absolutely. If that's what you want to do and that gets you fired up and you're going to bring along 1,000 of your friends that never heard of us before and we're going to get a bunch of social media coverage because of this. Again, that's an incredibly like extreme example. But I think it really, if they would have said to him like, no, you can't do that, like he would have never supported them again. He would have been so turned off. And so I do think there's something to be said about taking those steps in allowing for creativity and allowing for trying things that maybe have otherwise scared us. I mean, you said this in the beginning, when you and I first started doing this, we never thought people would give online. Absolutely not. That seemed crazy. I mean, 10 years ago, it was like, no way, people aren't going to give online. That seems so unsafe or risky or whatever it is. So Yeah. So you'll remember the
Totally.
Movember story. It stuck with
Oh
me.
my God. I love it. And it's so interesting. I just yesterday interviewed a neuroscientist who studies fear. And he talked about the two primary things that help reduce our fear are a sense of control. And so you're talking about that specifically, and knowledge. And so I'm just thinking about for folks who are listening to this, like, definitely, I think sometimes in our sector, we can like over knowledge ourselves and like get into analysis paralysis, and then we're
Yes.
still not taking action. But I think under like helping folks sort of understand or take steps forward to learn a little bit more around what would it look like to roll something like this out, or what would it look like to test this? What if you just got curious and one time you used that personalization and you got curious about the impact and how it affected click rates in the email, and you just decided, okay, it's not like we're going to make this change forever and we're always going to use that, but what about how could you test it one time that would increase your knowledge around how your community feels about it and let you play with perhaps some of these tools or these functionalities that you have been resistant to touch so far?
Yeah, it's so true. And I think the piece on like having the knowledge and the control will alleviate the fear. And so again, to try to get like more tactical, I think thinking about, are there organizations that we see out there that are trying these things that I could, understand a case study, or they can walk me through, like being intentional when you go to a conference or you connect with another nonprofit that are doing the things well that maybe are weaker for your organization or give you pause or give you worry. Like, don't be afraid to reach out and say to an organization like Movember, how did you go through that cultural shift of like being able to take more risk? Because I'm sure they weren't always like that. But I think, back to the piece of sort of the beginning of the conversation is navigating this digital fundraising landscape, technology, all of that can be really scary and can feel very overwhelming. And we're always sort of expected to do more with less as a sector. But that's really why I wanted to get into this work, is like the tech isn't going anywhere, and like people are only going to continue to find us through technology. And so I think it's this idea of prioritizing these highly personalized experiences, but still combining the powerful storytelling and still appealing to each individual in a different way. So like, I want to feel like when I engage with this organization, they engage differently with Mallory because she's a different supporter and she shows up for them in a different way. So that's really, really important. And then this idea of like giving donors flexible giving options. I talked about that in the beginning, and it's so true. I mean, early on when that moment of generosity spikes and we've already lost them, like that's just leaving so much generosity on the table, and knowing when to track and capture data so that you can continue to test and take some of those risks, because you're making more data-driven decisions is going to be really, really important. And then sort of meeting people where they are, like finding them on the channels that they're already on and experimenting with that and trying with that. And I just think there's so much to be excited about. And I really do feel like technology is going to solve for some of the more depressing trends I alluded to in the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, it's interesting. For my birthday this year, I donated to 38 organizations, and so I experienced all of these wildly different giving experiences. And it was so interesting to your point. And I think about, I ran into problems on some sites, or I started to doubt the legitimacy of the organization because the giving form was so weird. I was like, wait, is this real? And I like had to double check. And in habit and behavior design, we're constantly thinking about like, how do you make the action easier to do to get people over the action line? Like, people have to have enough motivation to take an action, the ability to take the action and be prompted to take the action, and their motivation wanes, right? And so making the action as easy as possible to do ensures that no matter where they're at on that motivation level, if they're there, you're going to capture that donation. They might not, though, submit it twice if it doesn't work. They might not go through,
Yep.
right, this many. And so to your point, like, I feel like what technology does is optimizes when it's optimized, it optimizes all of the deep, important work we've done up to that point and make sure none of that is lost. in friction on a website,
Yep.
or in a giving experience. So thank you for talking through that with everybody and giving people really specific sort of examples of how they could take different steps forward. I know we're out of time. I could talk to you forever, but is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? And then tell folks where they can find you and learn more about your work and Classy.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I could probably come up with 20 topics I wish that we covered. I knew when I saw the time that it was going to fly by, especially I think we're both we feed off of each other. And so, yeah, I was a Classy customer before coming here, and before ever being a Classy customer, I actually relied a lot on Classy's blog and a lot of the free resources that Classy provides. So I would encourage folks to start there, classy.org. We have everything you could possibly want to know, from how to prepare for an election year and make sure your organization is set up for success, to how to create a compelling end of year giving campaign. I mean, if you can think of something that you need help on, I can guarantee there's content for free, all sorts of different tools at classy.org. And then please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love to meet people doing great work. And so, yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to see you in a few days. And yeah, if any of your listeners, I don't know when this is coming out, but if you're at any of the big upcoming conferences, I'm most likely there. So please come find me and say hello. I'd love to chat.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, and I will see you very soon.